So, despite the dialogue cutscene improvements that Genshin brought to Luna 3, there's still one lingering question surrounding the game's dialogue scenes, which was once again brought to my attention by a humble relic in one of my video's comment section. But still, the mouths aren't moving anymore. It used to. A lot. Before. Though to this Rowlet's blunder, this comment was made in regards to how Nicole in the latest Not Cry Archon quest does not move her mouth at all. Though they did clarify later on that they have just goosed up and forgot that Nicole is actually mute and speaks with us through telepathy, which is why her mouth doesn't move at all. That being said, it doesn't detract from the fact that ever since the 1.x versions, Genshin simply has not maintained any sort of lip sync attempts between the characters' mouth movements with any of the other dubs other than the original Chinese dub, which to some people is rather confusing considering the fact that many of the other gacha games in their realm of quality and popularity have all had this as a feature from the onset of their releases. So why doesn't Genshin show any sign of bringing back this feature? Well, let's talk about it since I think a lot of people would find the reason to just be as equally annoying as I have found it to be. Not that Genshin's the first game that made me harbor this kind of frustration, but it was definitely one that I had felt the most. To begin with, a lot of the question with Genshin's lip sync in particular was the fact that they did have lip sync for their other dubs up until some chapters of the Liyue Archon quest. If you watch the dialogue cutscene when we first met the Knights of Favonius, you'd see that in English dub, the whole conversation is perfectly synced between mouth movements and the voiceover itself.
I am Jean, acting Grand Master of the Knights of Favonius. This is Lisa, our resident librarian.
Oh, are you sweeties here to help us out? You're both so adorable.
And for a while, Archon Quest and some Hangout quests share the same features. And they kinda did it in a way where they would initially release content without the lip sync, just in order to keep up with their developmental timeframe between patches, and then adding them in later versions once there is presumably leeway in their developmental bandwidth. However, since the Liyue Archon questlines, this feature has well and truly disappeared. And the reason for that is, honestly, from what I can gather, relatively simple. It just takes way too much time for them to be manually animating these cutscenes, especially considering how many scenes there are, how many lines are spoken, mostly due to this midget fairy, and it probably ended up being something that they didn't view as particularly worth doing in the long run. Or again, they just simply had no time for it. Because you guys have to have noticed, especially with something like the Knights of Favonius dialogue scene, these mouth movements are not wholly automatic. There must have been some fine-tuning done manually after they run it through some game engine plugin or something like that, or they completely made it from scratch. Although considering the fact that Hoyo was widely inexperienced with this kind of game back when they were developing Genshin, I might want to bet that they actually did fully animate these manually. Because that's frankly the biggest and, well, most damning difference between what Genshin doesn't have in comparison to games like Star Rail, WoWa, or Zenless. Genshin doesn't have an AI or sophisticated algorithm that is meant to automate syncing a character's mouth movements to their voiceovers, regardless of what dub you're using. Some people have said that this is due to the Genshin models not having enough rigging detail in the faces needed for an AI or algorithm to comfortably automate those key shapes for the game, but of course, the most logical explanation is that this was simply not a tech that was developed enough during Genshin's development for the devs to consider putting in the game. There are people who would have said Genshin was released in 2020, surely the technology would have been enough by then. Well, realistically, considering Hoyo's size back then and what probably would have been accessible to them, it probably wasn't something that was feasible for them to do. AI only really saw the gigantic RAM shortage-inducing development it is seeing now after the COVID times. And from what I can recall, and I've mentioned this before in the previous video where I was apparently jumped by the community of another WoWa creator, those of which then proceeded to dislike bomb the video. I don't know, I didn't really notice at the time, but what I said there was that the only game I can think of that already had that AI lip sync technology during the times of Genshin's development was the Final Fantasy VII Remake. And Hoyo of that time is no Square Enix and still isn't now, so I don't think that it was within the realms of their capabilities to have the feature then. And for those who question, then why don't they just continue syncing it the way they have been doing it back then? Well, for a non-live service game, then yeah, that's probably what would have been expected of them, and rightfully so. But for a live service game as big as Genshin, and one that updates as often as Genshin, unfortunately that simply isn't something that they have time for. Which is why they probably made a very quick decision to just abandon that early on in the game's life cycle. And with the sudden need for Notcry presumably ramming a fist up their developmental schedule's ass, I highly doubt that the thought ever seriously crossed their mind ever again. Now, on the other side of the coin is of course the obvious question of why can't they just add that AI or algorithm into the game now? Surely at this point, for a company with Hoyo's resource, they should be able to add that feature into their build. Well, this is the question that I honestly can't definitively answer from an internal perspective. We do know that Genshin does use an engine build that is rather outdated compared to their successors, obviously so considering their release times, and from what we can gather is that whatever new build that they are using for Star Rail or Zenless would have come built in with that AI lip sync technology or assistance. And in another more obvious vein, I'm not a video game developer. I will never be able to definitively and objectively tell you how easy or uneasy it is for this kind of thing to happen. The only thing I know is that anything involving code is an absolute biatch to work with, and nothing is as simple as it sounds. In my best of researches, industry professionals have mentioned that adding that kind of feature to an already live game is not usually something that game developers would do, mostly due to the cost and potential time sink depending on the game itself. But there are also some other people with seemingly educated opinions that have said that it should be simple for developers, particularly ones of Hoyo scale, to add that sort of feature, even when it comes to a live service game. So you're free to pick which pie of opinion you'd rather eat. But what I can tell you is that if we were to look at how the video game industry in general have usually dealt with being in a position like Genshin, then you'd eventually arrive at the disappointing conclusion that I've warned you about. They're probably not going to do anything about it. For some reason unknown to us outside those industries, this AI lip sync thing is really something that you either have from the very beginning of your game's launch, or it's just gonna be something that your game will never see the light of day of. The only thing I can think of why this ends up being the norm, considering the industry consistency, is just that it is not a feature that is meant to be retrofitted into a game or their developmental processes after their initial live launch. Whether it is due to technical difficulties, engine problems, time constraint, or just the overall lack of justifiable cost effectiveness, I just straight up have no clue. It just seems to be a cardinal thing among them. You can certainly go ahead and try to look up games that added these sorts of AI lip sync technologies after they had launched, but personally, I couldn't find any major examples, much less one that is at Genshin scale. But maybe you'd be able to get different results. And yeah, of course, it is very easy for us to just go, oh, they just don't want to spend the time to better the game because they don't actually care about the game. And while it is a riveting opinion, but when it is more of an industry thing, you kinda have to ask a bit further than just this one game itself. Another factor that makes Genshin's lack of lip sync a lot more noticeable is also the fact that it syncs to the Chinese dub.
听我说，哥哥，我已经有过一次旅行，所以你也要像我一样抵达终点，才能在自己的眼中留下这个世界的沉淀。
Listen to me, Ether. I have already traveled through this world once. Once you reach the end of your journey as I did, you will see for yourself the true nature of this world.
Of course, anyone that has any semblance of knowledge regarding Chinese and how it compares to other languages, particularly English, you'd know that trying to force a sync of mouth movement between those two is at times just nigh impossible without outright changing the animations itself. More often than not, you can say a whole lot more words in faster time and fewer syllables in Chinese than you can in English. That's why there's a lot of dialogue scenes that has its mouth movement stopped, yet the English voiceover keeps going with nothing but a straight-faced character to accompany it.
I'll skip over the complicated parts, but to sum it up, abyssal energies are all that lie beyond Tevat's border. We'd find ourselves in a real pickle if they ever made it through.
But what can you really do? They're Chinese developers. It's China #1 all the way. Of course they're gonna make it sync with their native tongue if they were to have any sync at all. And knowing how Hoyo treats Genshin as a game, and quite frankly, any of their games, unless Hoyo themselves insist that a feature should exist, then they are not gonna be adding something that might land them in even more hot water with the player base, lest they add it and then it has plenty of shortcomings. Because the track record shows, even amongst those other gacha games that I've mentioned, these AI lip-sync features, for some reason, are pretty prone to just crapping in on itself. The one gacha game that I've known to have near pristine lip-sync is Star Rail, and they rarely get any outright complaints apart from like very specific instances. Zenless and Wuwas are great from what I've experienced, but apparently for some reason more recently, the two of them are more prone to cracking around. And these weird rounds of shortcomings aren't something that is restricted to these gacha games. Ghost of Tsushima, a Game of the Year nominee, literally made around samurais and utter Japanese wet dream made by a AAA publisher with AAA budget, has lip sync for their English dub, but none for their Japanese dub. Which in any frame of mind is a ridiculous thing to say considering the fact that the game only has 2 dubs. Granted, they said that the director's cut version of the game, or like the PlayStation version of the game, markets itself as having AI lip sync for the JP dub, but from what I can tell from the players' reactions, it's actually pretty shit. Which is again surprising considering the fact that this is Sony we're talking about. If anyone had the money to throw at the problem, it would have been Sony. But then again, it is Sony. So maybe that also isn't all that surprising. Though it is worth noting that Ghost of Tsushima shared relatively the same developmental time period that Genshin had, which might further corroborate the theory that the tech just simply wasn't there during set time for it to be any good for most game developers. The only uber global game that I've seen gotten absolute praise for having immaculate dubbing lip sync quality is Cyberpunk, which has full AI assisted lip sync for all 10 of their dub languages, which is incredible. But unfortunately, look at how long it took to actually release the damn game. Billions of dollars unfortunately can't help with making more time or having you spend less time on stuff that by default would take a long time to perfect. And putting in a potentially subpar system is just not something that Genshin are willing to do, because honestly, that feels like it could impact immersion far more than not having any to begin with. I played Do at Night Abyss, and well, also partly due to the fact that the EN voiceovers are really nothing to write home about, the way they utilize their AI parameter for EN dubs is disturbing at best. Every sentence ends with the mouse just sort of going instantly from whatever open position it was supposed to be to just unnaturally shutting itself, which oddly enough for me made for a more immersion-breaking experience compared to what Genshin has to offer all these years. My larger gripe with Genshin's lack of lip sync actually has more to do with the cinematic cutscenes. I would have loved for them to actually find a way to circumvent it there. However, the problem there is much larger since they would then have to accommodate for longer scenes in order to maintain better pacing with the English dialogues. There is simply no way for them to try and force the English syllables in the space that the Chinese dub would have. They would almost have to animate separate scenes for that specific dub to still maintain any sort of quality dialogue pacing and delivery that English mouth movements would have needed. The only feasible way I could see this lip sync feature be a thing in Genshin is if they were to have an engine upgrade that comes along with said feature. And an engine upgrade was something that I thought may have been coming, but since Luna 3 has pretty much shown that Hoyo are determined to stick with the current engine and just ram as much directional improvement as they can with what they already have, I'm starting to doubt that they are going to do something like an engine upgrade anytime soon. And before a few of you dolts bring up Honkai Impact and how they got an engine upgrade, please don't bother. That game was 8 years old when it got its upgrade, and it sorely needed one since it was ball-sackingly old, although they were still doing a good job on pushing the engine itself, but still, they really needed one. And Genshin in itself doesn't need an upgrade as substantial anytime soon. But in any case, that's kind of why I think this lack of lip sync would be a feature that we won't really be seeing anytime soon. Besides, if they decide to add that before giving me the option to strongbox any artifact set at any time instead of having to wait multiple versions before they suddenly appear when I no longer need to farm them, then I would really have to question what actually is easy or not easy to add in a video game. Anywho, that's all I got for you today. Hope you guys got something out of this. Until the next video, the name's Leafy. And I'll see y'all next time. Sayonara.